Alright guys, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be addressing a question I get all the time, which is what length arrow should I be shooting? So I'm going to kind of cover my preferences for like a length of a hunting arrow and then what you can do with the target arrow. So starting off with a hunting arrow, generally it's going to be determined by your draw length. So on a hunting bow, I personally don't like an arrow that when I get to full draw, it's way inside the shelf of the bow, or the front of the riser, especially if you're shooting a fixed blade broadhead. Now the reason for that is because if I have a real high profile head on, especially on older bows that don't have a real wide sight window and shelf, like Matthews, the older Matthews, like the Q2 and like the Chill, if I draw back, and even if my rest doesn't fail, if one of my blades is oriented to where it catches, just barely even nicks the riser as it passes the front of that shelf, it's gonna pull my nock off the string. So now I'm gonna be at full draw, on an animal, and I got an arrow flopping around that's not on the string. When I go to let down, maybe it gets caught up in my cables, and now my broadhead's flopping around and it's unsafe. It could, who knows what could happen. It could cut your bowstring, but I don't want any chance of that broadhead catching the shelf as it goes by and pulling my nock off the string. The second thing that I like to cut them about a ½ inch in front of the riser is because if I, especially if you're kind of a newer shooter, and the heat of the moment you just yard that bow back and your grip is not set right, if I have a finger up and it's in front of some of those broadheads are pretty high profile, like the big 4-blade, like Grim Reaper, even if it's a mechanical, if I have a finger that's up and that broadhead goes flying by it, I'm not gonna have a finger after that arrow is gone. So for hunting setups, generally speaking, like on a Hoyt, if you have a 28-inch draw length, a 28.5 or 28.75 inch cut is gonna put that arrow anywhere from a quarter to a ½ inch in front of the shelf. Same with Matthews. Like if I have a 29-inch draw on the new Matthews, if I cut it 29.75, that's gonna put it a ½ inch in front of the shelf. So, there's a lot of tools out there. Like we use this, where the heck is it? Of course I can't find it. I'm back. We use this arrow here. It actually just has a bunch of little numbers on it. So it's basically a ruler, and you can put the bow in the draw board, draw back, and see exactly where a ½ inch is going to be in front of the riser, or a quarter inch. Now, I know there's a lot of people that shoot with an arrow that comes inside the shelf. That is okay, especially if you're shooting like a mechanical where you don't have blades that are going to catch on the shelf. But as just a general rule of thumb, I like to cut them either definitely even or just a quarter or ½ inch in front of the riser. Now, target arrows are a totally different animal because I'm not worried about, I'm never gonna have a broadhead on my target arrow. So actually I have my two arrows here. So this is my hunting arrow. This is a carbon injection from Easton. I have it cut at, so I have a 30-inch draw on my Traverse. I have it cut at 29.75, and then these inserts are 15/16 of an inch long. So it's sitting, well in front of my finger. With these 280s, that cut length seems to work really well. And I'm pulling 75 pounds, so I need a pretty stiff arrow, which is why I went with the 280s. But in contrast to that, this is my outdoor target arrow. Same draw length on my target bow, but this arrow is cut at like 27.25 inches, and I'm not kidding. Like when I'm at full draw, it literally comes to like right here. My rest is like right here. The reason for that is because the spine of your arrow can be determined, or the length of your arrow will determine the amount of flex in it. So like when you look on Easton's spine chart, it'll ask you what draw weight you're shooting and then what length of arrow you're wanting to shoot, and then it will give you a spine for those two things. So when I looked at it, a 340, if I was to cut it, let's just say even with the front of my riser, or cut it at like 29 inches, a 340 actually would have been the correct spine. But what I wanted to do, I built these pretty much specifically for outdoor, in kind of windier conditions, like field and USA archery stuff. I wanted an arrow that was gonna get there quick and was small diameter and got off the bow really fast. And you know, the reason for that is when it's really windy like that, the less time that arrow has to spend in the air, the better off I am, the less it's gonna drift with the wind. So what I did was thought, okay, well, you know, what if I cut an arrow at 28 inches? And it said, well then, you know, on the spine selector chart, it said, well then you could probably go with like a 380 spine, which is, you know, a little bit weaker spine. So originally I got them, I cut them at 28.5 to start and kind of tested them. And they were a little bit weak there. You know, I put 120 grains up front. Most of the spine is done with 100 grains. So I had to account for that. And I just started cutting them. You know, I pulled points out, cut them down a little bit, test them again. And I ended up getting to the point, thankfully, they ended up shooting really well because I only have about maybe 1/4 of an inch to spare before I actually cross onto the point here when I'm at full draw. But because this arrow is shorter, even though it's a weaker spine, because it's shorter, it still has the right amount of flex. I saved a little bit of weight, thus increased my speed, and it groups really well for me. So for target arrows, you can really play around with the length and point weight, and obviously you're probably not ever gonna go way past the end. You know, if you have an arrow that's way too stiff and you have to cut it 3 inches too long, or 3 inches longer, or 4 inches longer than your riser, you know, you just have the wrong spine. You need to go down a spine and then you can actually cut it to an acceptable length. But usually it's gonna be front of the riser to middle of the shelf somewhere for target arrows. And you can kind of play around with, you know, like I did, where it's like, okay, it says I should shoot a 340. That'd be if I cut it, you know, at 29 inches, but I want a little more speed. So what if I shot a 27.5 inch arrow? What spine would I need then? And it will tell you. Now I want to put a disclaimer out there. The spine charts are a good starting point. They're not always perfect. Like I was getting pretty nervous with this. It said it would be perfect at about 28.5 inches, and it was still weak coming out of my TRX 36, which is a fairly aggressive cam. So that was probably dumb on me. I actually just ordered more of these, and I just ordered the 340s, and I'll probably shoot them at like 20.5, 29 inches. The weight difference is nominal, and I mean, it's, you know, like 15 grains in the arrow, so I'm not losing a bunch of speed, and I don't have to worry about being underspined with them at all. So, you know, it's a good starting point to look at the spine charts there, but then you can play around with arrow length. So like I said, your draw weight and the length of arrow that you want to shoot is going to determine the spine you need. And then for hunting arrows, like I said, I don't like to cut them much past the front of my riser. So, you know, put it on a draw board, measure it, say, okay, I need a 29 inch arrow. You can look on Easton spine chart. It'll tell you, okay, at 29 inches and 65 pounds, you need, you know, whatever spine it is. So just thought I'd answer that. I get a lot of questions on what length should I cut my arrows, and my first question back is always, you know, how long is your draw length and what's your poundage? Because that's at least going to give me a starting point to start giving people some recommendations. So hope that clears some things up for you guys. If you have any more questions, as usual, hit me up below. Getting a lot of questions these days. I'm trying to get back to you in a timely manner. Sometimes it takes me a little longer than I would like, but I do appreciate everything. So until next time, guys, keep them in the middle. Remember, precision is a decision, and I'll see you on the range.